you so much for the introduction, Natalie. I think we have so much to talk about. Thank you so much, Miena, for the invitation to be here and for bringing so many wonderfully, deliciously inspirational people together, and to the whole of the Sonacax team. I know how much work this takes to put this on. And I also want to say I'm really honored to be on a panel with Mary Magic and also Antonia. I'm really glad that Antonia brought up concepts of complicity and work, and that's what I'll be talking about. So, this light is very bright. Okay. All right. So, today I'm going to talk about a project I've been working on since 2020. Actually, it's a project that comes out of another project on toxicity, so maybe we're leading to other places. The title is called Sunlight Doesn't Need a Pipeline, and it's an art, climate justice, and collaborative learning project that brings together many various art workers to think about what transitioning to a low-carbon planet might look like in the creative art sector and beyond. And when I say the creative art sector, I also mean the art and design sector. The project comes out of a Stanley Picker Fellowship. I think it's important to say that. And that fellowship was between Stanley Picker Gallery and Kingston University in London, England, and it is funded by the Arts Council England and the Stanley Picker Trust. So I first want to clarify what I mean when I say climate justice. So when I say climate justice, I mean it's a project that thinks about social as well as environmental injustices. It's a project about people and planet. I think intersectional environmentalist Leah Thomas is right when she says that environmental and social injustice is often fueled by the same flame. And I feel very strongly about that. And at its core, Sunlight works to articulate ideas of equity, human rights, healing and redistribution, as much as we think about biodiversity and low carbon impact. Those two things go hand in hand. So over the last year, a coalition of art workers, what I like to call growers, dreamweavers, caregivers, healers, storytellers, agitators and engineers, together with local community organizations, mostly within the London area and Kingston area, have come together to co-create a holistic and ever-growing decarbonisation plan for the art sector and beyond. I know that's a bit of a word. This project is made up of their voices, their stories, and their knowledges. And I want to acknowledge that this project is much theirs, really, as it is mine. And here's some of their names. So unlike the grand plans that we're used to seeing in modernity and in many Green New Deals, Sunlight's holistic decarbonisation plan takes the form of a set of web resources as essays, case studies, manifestos, interviews, consensus statements, meditations, and all of them come out of collaborative commissions, peer learning labs, community-driven research, workshops, and events. Some are already online, but the whole thing is going to be published on our website, Sunlight Doesn't Need a Pipeline, as a set of resources, as a gift to the community, really, from November onwards. So please do check it out. And the whole point of doing a plan really is that, as a freelancer, if you've been commissioned by a gallery or a museum, maybe you might want to use one of these resources, maybe one of the essays, to help you negotiate your contract, to see, or just maybe start a discussion about who takes responsibility for carbon emissions that come out of your project. Or if you're a grassroots organization and you have been concentrating on other struggles, you might want to use one of the case studies to start internal discussions about what your environmental policy is. So this project is very fresh. We just had our public community presentations last week, but please do go ahead and take a look at the website. It was designed by Studio Height, and it's low carbon and it's beautiful. So yeah. Okay. As 2022 draws to a close, I think it's fair to say that our politicians and our CEOs are caught up in a deep and reckless climate denial. In many years, I think they'll look back on our era with disbelief. At the same time, it seems to me that collectively in the global north, society is entering what is being communicated to us at least, a long age of repair. I think this long age of repair will far outlast the current epoch, which some call the Anthropocene. But echoing words, the words of thinkers who are important to my heart, like Francois Vergès, who will do this repair? And what must we keep and what must we let go in this process? Another word for repair is transition. In boardrooms, parliaments, and universities all over the world, CEOs and academics and politicians are currently planning how their workers and citizens will transition from a high-carbon lifestyle, dependent on capitalistic enclosures and extraction, to a low-carbon world. Each of these pathways have many trade-offs and uncertainties. You might have heard of the financialization of nature or a burn now, pay later attitude. And each of these top-down routes either reinforces a market-based approach to the environment or ignores varied individual needs, vulnerabilities, and histories, and harms, instead of protects, the planet in its various entanglement of social, political, ecological, and sacred ways of being. So what I'm saying here is that the current stories of transition and repair that are being offered to us from the top are, number one, inadequate, and number two, written by a very small handful of people who will determine our futures for many, many years to come. Transition will touch everything in our lives, but very few of us understand what we mean when we say just transition. And I believe that much depends on the reimagination of our social organisation. In the art and design sectors in particular, I think the effectiveness of a transition or a just transition relies to an extent on understanding our role and the consequences in such a shift, which I don't think we do. In one of our interviews, neuroscientist Araceli Camargo observes that there is a mythos around climate experts. Only a few people claim to know what's going on. And the reality, and I think many of us in this room know, is that the climate emergency shows up very differently in our communities and in our lived experiences. So the Sunlight Project really works with others to explore what it means and what it will take to transition in a way that is just and in ways that are nurturing and regenerative towards a reparative world, starting with the creative arts sector and beyond. So, just to reinforce this idea that we need to look at ourselves and our fields first, I think. A quick note on the form and structure before I talk you through some of the artworks. As I said, the project began in 2020. It comprises 10 research projects, as well as a number of performances and artworks. And with the 10 commissioned projects, almost all of them involve some sort of co-creation, collaborative learning, peer learning, or community-based research. This is purposeful because we're building these stories of just transition from the bottom up. They are stories about histories and collections, about reparation and intersectional justice. They're stories about literacy and riches and intergenerational wealth, about ghosts and colonial institutions, technological governance, and much more. And at the center of all of these projects is the idea that people in communion are the holders of knowledge, not walled-off institutions. So we work to develop these nuanced stories with others to create space for conversation, debate, and reflection on what terms like transition, carbon, and decarbonization actually mean in action, particularly as these realities continue to intersect with injustices and inequities of many types. There's also the belief that everyone comes to the space with a different set of values. I really feel that I need to say this. I feel like so much of our worlds are polarized. And it's important to say that many people have different upbringings and needs in this space, and we should all be allowed to critique and question and challenge and improve a pathway to repair. This is a pathway they will not finish in their lifetime, but pass on to the next generation and for many generations to come. Okay, so let's move on to the fun stuff. So I'm going to talk you through some of the projects so you can get a sense of this ever-growing decarbonisation plan and how it was formed. This first one is called the Anti-Offsetting Primer, and it's a commission developed by Brazilian artist Luiza Prado. It takes the form of an essay and a series of interviews that reflects on the practice of carbon offsetting in the arts within the context of the climate emergency. And the hope with this project was that we could offer creative and useful reflections engaging in the arts and culture sectors from the perspectives committed to the struggle for environmental justice. So this project comes out of a really particular context within the UK and within England. As a regularly funded arts organisation, you have to report the In the UK, if you're an arts organisation, first of all, the likelihood is that you're in part funded by the Arts Council England, which is the English national public funding body for the arts. And as a regularly funded organisation, you have to report the amounts of tons of carbon dioxide that you release into the atmosphere as a business every year as part of annual carbon reporting measures. And from that, you have to use that to develop an environmental policy. And the idea is that you're trying to reduce your carbon emissions year on year, right? And if you cannot reduce your carbon emissions, let's say you have to fly someone over from Australia to do a project, then the Arts Council England suggests that you should use carbon offsetting. And for those of you that are not very aware about what carbon offsetting is, it's a way that in the global north, an individual or company can compensate for your emissions by funding an equivalent carbon dioxide saving elsewhere, right? It's a financial and accounting mechanism that allows your cafe chain to say that your monocultural coffee delivered to you in a paper and plastic cup is carbon neutral. It's a checkbox that allows you personally, to compensate for your emissions, seamlessly incorporated into the purchase of a plane ticket. It is carbon credits available as investments, as specialized emerging stock markets, easy enough for a conglomerate to acquire, and then make the claim that its newest endeavor, a copper mine, is carbon neutral. And so, as Luiza Prado tells us, it's precisely these false notions of disposability that carbon offsetting is designed to appeal. It is a seductively simple proposal, one that operates on the premise that money can fix any problem. It demands no further commitment, no real reflection and change. And the idea of carbon offsetting as something that is pretty insidious, if you haven't picked up on where I'm going with it, it takes destruction from the global north as a given, right, and situates repair within this transactional framework. And obviously the reality is much more complicated. Landscapes are homes to modes of living and culture, histories and people, where human and more than human relations emerge, all of which continue to be rendered disposable through the practice of offsetting. The world is not a one-to-one model, right? And so the primer was born. Through peer learning, Prado invited a number of art workers from very, very varied and disparate contexts. So she spoke to an archaeologist, Sarah Maddy, who researches fertility and healing shrines in North Lebanon. She spoke with an environmental journalist, Maxwell A. Ayamba, who founded the Sheffield Environmental Movement, a project that promotes access and participation in the natural environment for people from Black and ethnic minority communities. She spoke to artist and activist Amazoni Arawak, who is part of Wapishana tribes, who works in the north of Brazil with the Yanomami tribe to protect the land in the north of Brazil, and a number of others. I don't have time. And through interviewing and dialogue, Prado worked with them to discuss their work in relation to environmental justice, but also their own art practices, right? So in their conversations, they spoke about something called a maloca, which is like a communal house, which Amazoni sort of practices within his community. They spoke about the shifting landscapes of healing and ritual with Sarah Maddy, and the idea that the healing shrines or fertility shrines are changing because of the climatic conditions are changing in Lebanon. And she spoke about how colonial institutions comprise ghosts and how do we navigate the white British landscape, right? So from these dialogues, she has made a gift for thinking about other possible ways of doing art, not only in terms of production, but also alternative infrastructures, systems, and practices. A number of the projects reach out to those who have been embedded in this research for a long time, those who are most affected by these issues, whose stories are theirs to tell. And I just want to say that this project is not about centralizing or appropriating other people's stories. Actually, it's about a coalition and a dialogue so we can create deeper meaning, to ask what does a just transition look like and how can we heal the imagined future and broken relations of the present. The next work I want to talk about, I'll probably hurry up a bit, is called Our Community Inheritance. It's a project by an agitator, educator, and self-proclaimed ex-curator, Dr. Cecilia Wee. And when we talk about climate justice, often we talk about future generations. What will our communities be left? And how can we empower future generations by passing on our riches? And our community inheritance is a project that thinks about the wealth of riches in our community and their survivability or our survivability in the interim. And it does this by exploring or by positioning itself as a project that looks at the more equitable circulation of wealth and resources within UK communities. So just take some water. So for this project, this is the first one of a number of projects that Cecilia is putting into place. But this first one, she worked with Grenfell Community Health and Wellbeing Service, which is the official NHS, which is our National Health Service in the UK, right? A community to set up that was set up to support the families of the Grenfell Tower disaster in London in 2017. I don't know if you know about this, but it's a tower block went up in flames and 72 people died. And after 5 years, all of those bereaved families and survivors have still not had justice. The communities around Grenfell Tower are located in the west of London, where many Afro-Caribbean and Brazilian communities live. And I think it's important to say, because we opened talking about air pollution. Since 1960, the community has suffered much violence already at the hands of the UK government. You can see this massive Westway motorway that creates a lot of noise and air pollution that was kind of like plonked within the middle of their communities in 1960. And I think this has taken many, countless lives. We've also been talking about visibility. So, and on the right-hand side is also a place known for Carnival, right? One of the biggest cultural events in London across the year. So we invited the community to tell their intergenerational wealth stories and present small scales of what the community needs to thrive, diverse definitions of wealth and shared community, and intergenerational wealth stories. So, thinking beyond pounds and dollars to what our riches are. What are our riches? So this is some of the posters that were made from the workshops that kind of were people telling them about their needs, but also their desires. So I think it's really important to say also that this is a participatory budgeting project. So Cecilia has given over her production budget for the whole project to the community as a seed fund, and they get to decide what they want to work on for climate action. In addition to giving space to the voiceless and exploring contemporary issues impacting communities and the good work that's going on in those communities, we also sort of did a number of projects that created tools or kind of like guidelines for moving forward. This is a project called Digital Decarbonisation Consensus and Conjectures, and it's led by Dr. Anne Passack in Canada at Trent University. And if you've not heard about their work with the Low Carbon Research Methods Group, I think you should check it out, particularly if you're in academia. And the whole point of this project was that network cultures and digital technologies are both a problem and a solution for climate emergency. Obviously, we need data-intensive sensing and modeling to actually know what's happening with the climate. And also IoT technologies and Zoom, right, stops us, getting on planes and traveling across the world. But at the same time, digital emissions or the carbon emissions from digital are comparable to the aviation industry these days. And also it's very difficult to separate what is an individual action versus like the infrastructure of technology, right? You've probably heard about all the cooling of data centers and how difficult that is. So we brought together 24 stakeholders across art and technology to think about specific demands and actions in the arts. And like so many of these projects, so much came out of it. And I'm really excited to publish this next week. We have a 5-page manifesto that's a really clear roadmap about what you can do as an organization or as an artist if you work within art and technology. I'm not going to tell you the findings. You can come onto the website and read it yourself. In addition to tools and community projects, we also commissioned some essays, and I just want to tell you quickly about this one. This is Chanelle Adams. She's a researcher, writer, artist, and I asked her to look closely at the institutions and infrastructures of art. And she wrote this incredible essay, which is online, called The Right to Rest in Peace, which explores the lifespans of museums and the looted and pillaged accumulations of art, artifacts, plants, animals, minerals, and, separately, human remains in their collections. And in Adams's practice, she often thinks with haunt and ghosts, which she uses as a metaphor to explain a symptom of historical unrest. She also runs amazing ghost tours of institutions, so please go find her and ask her to do one of these. And so as part of her essay, she asked, what would it take for these ghosts to rest in peace? And she speaks in the essay, and you can see a photo of it here, of a taxidermized Abyssinian giraffe that she calls incarcerated in the Toulouse's Museum of Natural History. And throughout the essay, she carefully unpacks these layers of restoration, but also abolition and care to show us that museums, through technologies of preservation, actually hold hostage the sacred realms of life and death. They make, we were talking about an altar life earlier, she talks about an afterlife. They make an artificial timelessness. And so in this place, Adam asks about the histories of decay and asks what would happen if we took museums back to the orchards, using a well-known quote by the science fiction writer Octavia Butler. Okay, so the last work I want to talk to you about, just before I mention a little bit about the festival, and I want to leave with a provocation, is a project called the Open Curriculum. This is also, like all of the other projects and all the tentacular kind of research that we're putting out there, is ongoing. The Open Curriculum is an experimental alternative education project. It's initiated by Dr. Susanna Haslam, the wonderful blonde, and it involves through the encounters with neuroscientists and health activist Araceli Camargo, curator, art worker, writer Megha Ralapati, MC, beatmaker and filmmaker, photographer and writer Apex Zero, and artist and agroecologist Charles Pryor. And the Open Curriculum at the moment exists materially as 4 conversations on 3 subjects: carbon, solidarity, and work. And the whole point is to use peer learning to build a multi-perspectival account of these 3 subjects. Again, this commission comes out of a very specific issue that art workers experience in the creative arts sector in the UK. Because if you work in a large enough organization or a diligent enough arts organization, you are often provided with climate literacy training manuals or websites. And these are often very dry, and they tell you what the climate emergency is, right? How many parts per million of carbon dioxide are in the atmosphere? And to me, this is completely abstract and faceless narratives that have no social or shared meaning. They also are very Western. They perpetuate this idea of a one world worldview, which we can talk about maybe another time. And so I asked Susanna, whose background is in alternative educational practices, to sidestep from literacy training manuals and guidelines and maybe try something else. What other way of doing things are there? And she created this alternative curriculum that offers different routes or different forms into carbon literacy. And she based it on the act of genuine and empathic learning, broadly applying what Bell Hooks calls the love ethic, which is based on, quote, showing care, respect, knowledge, integrity, and the will to cooperate. And one of the most striking revelations was that of this project was that when Susanna interviewed these 4 people, is that often when we talk about toxicity or the climate, we talk about an imagined future or a collective imaginary, but it always involves this imaged impression of an ideal user. And in reality, although we have common terms like carbon, solidarity, or work, everyone comes to these contexts with different values, experiences, and needs. So when we asked Apex Zero what was carbon, he grew up in South London, and he professes that he went to the worst school in South London, right? He said, someone like me is not supposed to know what carbon is. Not really. But when we asked Araceli, who's on the screen, who is from Turtle Island descent, and I say that because it's important to their answer, she's like, everything is carbon. And rather than try and minimize it through the language of decarbonization and other it as a dehumanizing process, which we've done to many people throughout modernity, she said that she is in solidarity with carbon. And actually, she understands that carbon at the moment is in pain. Carbon hurts. And I found that really, really moving. I'm going to quickly just move on because I realize I've got like 30 seconds. Okay, so last Friday we held a day-long community festival and teach-in, which presented all of these different projects to local community support groups and organizations, as well as audiences connected to the gallery. Everything was reused and recycled. We had a big public vote at the end, so whatever the community voted for now gets put into the Stanley Picker environmental policy for the next 3 years. I feel that it's really important to mention it. That's, the people that spoke. That's Cecilia presenting our community inheritance. This is Arjun Harrison Mann of Studio Height. I think it's important to say his work is about disability, justice, and design. He designed the identity and the low carbon website for us. And what was really interesting was that he was like, so often access and low carbon are at odds with one another when making design decisions. So that was kind of a really big learning point for us. As you can see, there's lots going on. I can't talk about it. Okay. So we closed. So when I started this project, I said, after the festival, I want to give more than we take. And that started off as a conversation about carbon, and it ended up about community. So for the next 3 weeks, we've given over the gallery space to community organizations such as this Polish Ukraine support group who called Flowers with Ukraine, who are doing a lot of textile work. And some people are having meetings, some people are running workshops. I think that's just kind of important to make. Okay, so I just want to say one last point, which is a provocation. Okay, so at the beginning of this project, I offered to do the annual carbon report for the Stanley Picker Gallery that would be given to the Arts Council England at the end of the year, explaining the carbon emissions for the organisation. And as the project progressed, in tandem, I was collecting data about the organization, right? I was looking at their transport, their production, their energy costs that had been made across the year. And initially, I was trying to make this point that carbon footprints of artists, particularly within the UK and Europe and America, are much, much larger than we think they are, and we have to reconfigure what our responsibility is. But at some point, I realized in that process that I was doing it wrong, right? Instead of moving us closer to the answer, this individual carbon accounting and reporting is actually part of the problem. My report and its data kept growing. It kept getting bigger and bigger as I was trying to figure out where the lines of responsibility lie. And I think this really fits in with the narratives of toxicity we've heard today. So at one point, I was trying to find out the data for all the 0 hours contracted workers that came in and out of the gallery for a year, and also what were the life cycles of all the mobile phones that they had that came in and out of the gallery space. And at that point, I was like, oh, okay. My thinking was that we are, as art workers, are part of a gig economy and we're never not at work, right? And at that point, I had to talk to myself and go, Dani, please stop. There's something really critically wrong with the worldview when for a year's worth of making art, we are required to count, compensate, and defend a mode of living that many of us aren't even benefiting that much from. And many more who are not even part of these systems, who are also artists, are not benefiting at all. A key finding of the Sunlight Commission is that all over the world, people who have been disenfranchised and oppressed for generations are working hard to reclaim back land, but also many are working hard to reclaim relations with land, relations with labor, access, and energy, to reclaim their own histories and stories that have been suppressed. This is not in some far-off land. This is in our museums. This is in our communities and in our lived experiences. Terms like sustainability and decarbonization are the ghosts that haunt us in our waking life. Like debt and money, they are fictions designed to hold us in place. So what we did was design a carbon report in the form of a map. And this is my gift to the Arts Council as the carbon report for the project. The map is made from cyanotypes, so it's literally made from sunlight. And instead of counting carbon, what I've suggested is that you just need to follow a simple guidance in everything that you do. For every decision you make in your project, ask what is your relationship to 4 things: land, energy, access, and labor. And if you think you are truly in a good relationship with all of these 4 things, then your project probably isn't extractive, but I'm guessing your project is, right? And we need to start thinking, we need to start fighting to be in the right relationship with everything we do so we can work with everyone else to begin to heal the imagined future and broken relationships of the present. Thank you.